Welcome, everybody, to Finding Hermes. As always, I hope you're ready to lay your cards on the table and go through the door with the God of the mind, because these are days of transition, the days of the crossroads, and the days where it seems reality itself is tricking us, and we know our mind is always tricking us, so we need to get on the good side of Mercury and all those other trickster gods. And we are very happy to be joined by Jake Loco. Jake, thank you very much for coming on the show. I don't know why I said we, like I'm important. I guess I'm used to Aeon Byte when Vance is around.
Us in the archives, Miguel.
I am very honored to have you on the show.
Thank you very much, Miguel. I just want to say really quickly, too, I've been listening to Aeon Byte since 2018. That's the first time I ever really heard or understood what Gnosticism means. So I appreciate everything that you and Vance, the Moondog, have been doing. Really appreciate you guys. And I never thought I would be here speaking with you. So I love this opportunity. I'm really grateful for it. And I'm excited to get into today's episode.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, I think the audience might be wondering, well, gosh darn, what does this medieval poet have to do with addiction, recovery, wholeness, individuality? But I think we're going to find out that Dante's message it's perennial, it's eternal. That's why he is Italy's most famous poet. That's why his poem still, you might say, gets clicks on the internet and sells books and all that good stuff. But how did you become interested in this poem or the esoteric in general?
Yeah, so funny story. For this particular poem with Dante's Inferno, I did learn about it back when I was in college, but I didn't really care about it. And it kind of seemed like one of those propaganda texts that was meant to put the fear of God into people. So I was like, oh, I'm going to not pay much attention to this. And my teacher at that time was also, you could tell they weren't really into it. They were just supposed to do it through the curriculum. So it was kind of brushed to the side. But by trade, my day job, I'm a high school English teacher. And so I love talking about books. And I've always been into the gnosis that you can find within each text. Dante found me at school, at work. They were giving away free books. And Dante's Inferno was just sitting there, just the single book, book one of the 3 series, The Divine Comedy. And I picked it up. I was like, oh, I remember sleeping through class when we learned about this. I'm older, wiser, a little more experienced. And now that I've read through it again in its completion with some nice footnotes, I was able to show what the dark night of the soul or what the spiritual awakening could look like in this Christian context. So it's very interesting. That's how I found it. And just, of course, as an English teacher, I love chatting about books, like I said. So I'm excited for you and I to dive into it and to see what we can pull out of the Inferno and give to the listeners for their own personal journey.
Exactly. Yeah, I remember checking the book out when I was like 10 years old. And of course, like everybody, I was really interested in the hell part because as humans, we like darkness. Obviously, his Inferno is still the most popular one. I don't know if that's a good thing about humanity, that we're so attracted to the darkness, but maybe that is a good thing, things we need to work on. But I didn't understand it, and it would be many years later before I really delved into it. So for the audience, why don't we start with Dante himself? How did he come to write, or what happened to this 13th century poet that sent him to write this classic text?
So the beginning of Dante's journey is very interesting, and it's very relatable in terms of writing an allegory that people can like, oh yeah, I've gone through Dante's journey as well. But for him in particular, it stood out to me because Dante was essentially canceled. He was exiled from Florence. He was a victim of cancel culture, and the corrupt pope, the politician at that time, the ruling class, if you will, did not really take a liking to Dante and Dante's views. So they canceled him, exiled him. So not only was he wandering the wilderness of the Italian peninsula by himself, but he was also disconnected from the love of his life, Beatrice. And in terms of what we're going to discuss today, I think it's important to point out Sophia and this Gnostic divine wisdom, this divine beauty. And basically, if you think about it like this, Dante was willing to go all the way down to hell and then back again just to reach Beatrice. So that's definitely worth noting. It's the greatest love story ever told, if you ask me. And so yeah, Dante was canceled. He was exiled. He's wandering alone by himself, and he's wakes up. It's if you've ever seen that.
Before we start that, probably a little bit more context to it. Yeah, Beatrice and Sophia, I've always felt the same thing, but he never got together with Beatrice. She didn't answer his DMs on Twitter or anything like that. He saw her publicly twice, and then she passed away, right? So but he made a huge effect on his soul.
Yeah, Beatrice is absolutely one of those missed encounters, you know, the love that could have been but never was. So that makes it even more challenging for Dante to be alone and abandoned from civilization, essentially. And now he's thinking about Beatrice. He's, again, another missed opportunity. His career has been ruined. His love life has been ruined. So he's in a very dark spot in the beginning, which is why it's so fascinating, because we've all been there at one point. This is his rock bottom, except ironically, he's going to go even further down and he can realize.
Yeah, I mean, this is a perennial story, as I say, whether it's Jung, who hit a depression and he went deep down to find his soul. Some people said when he had his Red Book experience, he actually had a gun by his table because he said, if this is too much, I'm going to end it. And yeah, the dark night of the soul, the mystery religion going down into Hades. Christ, after he's crucified, he has to go down into hell and clean things up. It's a horrible, not a horrible journey. It's in a way, it's cleansing. It's necessary. And each one of us, at some point, we are going to have to go down into hell. We're going to have to face all our demons. Dante meets people that screwed him over in real life. He meets mythological creatures. He meets Christian figures. Everything he meets, he has to face. But at the other side of hell is, of course, what? Purgatory and then heaven.
Yep. So the thinking about the entire story in that 3-part context is very interesting as well, because we can tell Dante's in a very bad place, and he has to go through this dark night of the soul, this dark period to reawaken into the divine light. And that's his whole journey going down into hell. Is the purpose is to become aware of his sins or his errors. And then in part 2, when he's climbing the Mount of Purgatory, it's a very strenuous, long journey. Going up Purgatory is supposed to be all about renouncing those sins, getting clean, or becoming cleansed. And then, of course, the final destination is paradise. Dante can be reunited with Beatrice, so it was all worth it in the end, because he had to be thrown into that trial by fire or trial by hellfire in order to reach Beatrice. So it was a necessary part of this whole process.
Yeah, the journey inward, the journey to finding your soul, your true soul, and everything in the past no longer matters. And like you said, nobody did cancel culture like the church in medieval times. Right. They pretty much, in Roman times, Greek times, you get killed or you get exiled, but the church was like, you have the wrong thought, or you made the mistakes, and you're just out into the gulags, if you would, of society.
Absolutely.
And he wrote it in Italian too, which tells you that he was trying to make it accessible and go against the hoity-toity elite of where he was from, Florence.
Absolutely, yeah. Thinking back to this 2022 year, this is the 700th anniversary of Dante. The fact that this poem was written in Italian as opposed to Latin, absolutely. Making this story accessible was a great act of rebellion in a way. And just to finish your other point too, that you brought up, the cancel culture in the church. I mean, yeah, you could think back to Socrates or Christ himself and these figures who were canceled. And I think, just the fact that cancel culture has become a popular phrase in these 2020s is really interesting to note. And so that's kind of how Dante arrives at this dark place. And it's as if he wakes up from a long bender and he realizes, okay, I'm by myself in the forest. I got nothing. I got nobody. What am I going to do? So that's where he meets his guide. Like when we brought up Jung earlier, it's interesting to note Jung and Philemon, right? The spirit guide. And that's where Virgil comes in. Virgil is Dante's spirit guide. He is the father figure sent by Beatrice. So he's an angel or a spirit sent to guide Dante through this journey. And without Virgil, Dante would not be able to go into this in the first place.
Awesome. Yeah. And I think this is the importance of the active imagination, if you would. My best breakthroughs working with my Jungian advisor is creating these different characters and interacting with them, whether it's by writing, whether it's having conversation, stuff that children do naturally for their own health. And I've created this whole slew of characters with names, and we have conversations, and it's very healing. And like you said, Jung did it with Philemon, and later on you find out it's really Simon Magus, the arch heretic and enemy of the church. But I think, yeah, the active imagination, this role playing, and people may say, well, that's kind of weird. It's like, no, I think when we understand the thoughts in our heads that all of us have every day, we are having these thoughts, these characters that come alter. But this is a way of formalizing and making it interactive and finding resolution. Because sometimes if you are in pain, you create this character and you can just say, all right, Mr. Anxiety, what's the problem? Let's work it out, because we're kind of taking the same place in this head. Yep. We got a life to
same
live.
Boat.
Yeah, tell me where this trauma is coming. Tell me what I'm afraid of, and I, the ego, will work it out with you slowly. Of course, with it's always better with a professional, spiritual teacher, a priest, or a Jungian. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting to point out that these archetypes that Dante encounters, or the mythological creatures like Medusa and the Minotaur, and, they all have their place within Dante's psyche or his spiritual experience to represent these obstacles and these hurdles that he must overcome while he's becoming aware of his errors in this first part, and then later to be able to renounce them and be cleansed and reach paradise. So yeah, it's a process of confronting each of these figures, but also conversing with them. So that's what's cool about Virgil, is that Virgil encourages Dante to stop and speak and have a conversation with these lost souls, these spirits who are sunken into the underworld, so that Dante can learn something from him. And it's the whole process is an educational experience that Dante, if he were to run through hell as fast as humanly possible, he would not have had the same experience. So it's the fact that he's stopping to have a conversation with each of these people, these lost souls, is really what gives him that trial by fire that he really needs in the end.
Awesome. No, it makes perfect sense. So why don't you take us down into hell?
Sure.
If you would. Yeah, I'm sure you thought as a child, you're like, that's going to be my dream. I'm going to take people on a guide down to hell. But tell us, Virgil comes, Beatrice, aka Wisdom, sends this avatar of him, Virgil, who in real life Dante really loved. That's one thing people laugh about is Roman and Italian characters kind of get the best part, but like Greek characters don't, because as an Italian, he wasn't a fan of the Greeks. The Romans thought that they came from Troy and all this other stuff. But anyway, so then Virgil takes him down to 9 hells. Why don't you take us on a tour guide and what means, or what it means to you?
Absolutely. And, just to state my intention, my goals, like I have nothing to sell here. I'm really hoping to encourage people to pick up this book for themselves and figure out, what does hell look like for you? But more importantly, what does paradise look like for you? Because that's what we should keep in mind as we discuss this. Because I was apprehensive to begin reading this book because I didn't want to depress myself. The world was already crazy and I didn't want to drag myself down. But this book has actually propped me up in a way and helped me look up towards paradise and consider how to get there and what kind of challenges need to be overcome. So although people might be expecting me to go in order, I want to switch things up a bit and let people know that the top 3 layers of hell, there's 9 total realms, 9 circles. The top 3, I believe, are the most important because they're the lesser sins and they're more common to the common average person. Down at the way bottom, you'll find Satan or Lucifer, or you'll find Judas. So those are characters who are caught in cycles of betrayal or violence. And I'd like to think optimistically, not many people are actually these characters down there who are treacherous, who are betraying their family and their friends and all that. So it's important to note, but it just going from the bottom up, we have Lucifer and Judas. A really cool note to pick up on was the fact that the bottom of hell, the deepest depths of this inferno, is covered in ice. You would think it would be fire, but it's a frozen landscape, and Lucifer and Judas are stuck. Like they literally can't move at all. They're stuck in the ice as if they were cemented there. And there's a plenty of great as above, so below circumstances here where their behavior in the mortal realm and the earthly realm will mimic their punishment down below. So these 2 are stuck in a very unforgiving, freezing climate, and they so we have these lower layers all about falsification, betrayal. Basically, the bottom section of hell deals with the fact that the best way to hurt someone or to harm other people is either to lie to them and betray them, or to actually use physical violence against them. And selfishness, more consumption, overconsumption, it's the sex, drugs, and rock and roll that I think we can all relate to. But I do want to stress this, that the bottom layers of hell are more of those rare, you could say like psychopathic people who end up there. So it's not like we can all relate to each layer of hell, but it's those top 3 that really mean the most, especially when we're finding Hermes through these experiences. So going up, we also have sowers of discord, which is really interesting because I'm sure throughout 2020 we've had bad actors or useful idiots who were literally put in a position to cause chaos just for the sake of chaos, right? I don't know if you've ever seen the Vikings show on History Channel, but they have this moment where Ragnar Lothbrok is being executed and he's dropped into a pit of snakes. And that's what happens to thieves. I'm not saying Ragnar was a thief. I mean, you could think of him like that. He stole the land of the Saxons from them, but still, it's there's very interesting reptilian imagery there. And not only do the thieves rest in a pit of snakes, well, they're not resting, but they're dropped down there. They're entombed by these slithering snakes. And then they also become a reptile themselves. They transform, they transfigure. Again, as above, so below. That's that cold reptilian thieving side of humanity that could be unleashed given the right circumstances. And just to put a pause,
or either that, or maybe Dante was a precursor to David Icke and Alex Jones, the lizard people.
The lizard people,
the first lizard people.
They are down there, those reptilian overlords. But yeah, I mean, as we go through these different circles, it's good to point out that one of the common themes that both Dante and Virgil will speak on is the fact that whether you refer to it as sin or error or human flaws, they all have one thing in common, and that's they threaten human reason. So morality, our ability to figure out what's right and what's not right, is clouded by this dark cloud of corruption. So that could be in many forms. In this lower level, it's all about being hypocritical or blackmailing people, trying to manipulate people through fortune telling and tarot reading, which things that I enjoy. But the whole point of these fortune tellers and these diviners is that they're trying to deceive people and manipulate them.
And they walk around with their heads back, right?
Yeah,
they're always looking back. That's their punishment.
Very interesting. Yep, they were trying to look forward their whole lives. They were trying to help other people see what the future may have been, or they themselves were obsessed with what came next. And yeah, it's ironic. Now they're face backwards forever. They can never see what's ahead of them. and they were blinded by this abuse of power through magic. Now, there's another thing I want to ask you, Miguel. It's really interesting because you brought up Simon Magus earlier, and there's a circle of hell reserved for the Simony. Yes.
Yeah, that's I can explain because I'm actually doing a presentation on Simon Magus soon. But in Acts of the Apostles, which is Simon is over there casting spells and all that, and the apostles have no problem in doing magic spells and all this weird stuff. But in fact, they baptize them. And then Simon is hanging out with the apostles or having a good time in Samaria. And Simon sees Peter laying his hands on people's heads and the Holy Spirit comes down. And Simon's like, whoa, can I Venmo you or PayPal you some money for some of that Holy Spirit?
Send some Bitcoin.
So Peter then chews his ass out and says, you cannot buy this shit. This is only for us. And the story ends with Simon kind of like all forlorn walking away like, oh, woe is. Now, obviously, this was a story meant to, like with Mary Magdalene or the Apostle Thomas, you bring these characters in and then you marginalize, you make them small and weak, like Doubting Thomas or Mary Magdalene in the 70s. So they did that with Simon Magus, who was the leader of the Gnostic movement. So later in the medieval times, around when Dante is in the 13th century, the church came with the idea of simony, which is trying to buy your position in the church, trying to buy your position into heaven by giving money. Needless to say, the church created this law that they weren't exactly following, if you know what I mean. So,
right.
So that's simony for you.
Yeah, it's crucial to see how Dante was able to criticize society after being exiled himself, and he was able to point out a lot of flaws in society, like being able to pay to cleanse your sins. It definitely goes against all the teachings of Christ, if you ask me. So it's interesting to see him take that on. There's a couple more I'll run through. I will never be able to run through the whole story. We'll only scratch the surface, which is exciting for the listeners because they will have to go in and fill in those gaps. But I do want to bring up, there's quite a lot of connection to both sexuality and sexual energy that it's interesting to point out in terms of overcoming addiction or recovery. And in one of these lower circles, there are people who are fraudulent and malicious, but there's also what's referred to as the seducers and the flatterers. And given what we just spoke about, people who are their human reason, their higher reason is clouded by this desire, this sinful behavior that prevents them from thinking clearly or from feeling empathy for others. So they are stuck in their own excrement. The flatterers and the seducers are both punished in these really horrible ways because they were people who were just nice to others to get what they wanted, or for the seducers who are, and this is very symbolic here, they're being chased around by a horned demon with a whip, and they're being whipped in a circle, and these horned demons, and we know horns have a very symbolic meaning. We won't go into it now, but the fact that they're being punished for getting a woman pregnant and then abandoning them. And that's absolutely a great example of lust, as opposed to starting a family, being a strong father figure. These people who are stuck down here are absolutely, I guess you could say they deserve it. And it's interesting that Dante, as he travels down and down and down, he relates to the people on the upper circles because he starts to criticize and scorn these dark souls. So it's cool to see Dante is developing throughout his journey, and he is responsible, according to Virgil, to pass judgment on these darker souls.
Fascinating. Yeah, I know that. Yeah, the top layer of hell is with this sort of dreary place where all the noble pagans can be. They don't exactly get punished, but they can't get into heaven because Dante was still a practicing Roman Catholic, and there are rules. There are cosmic rules in his mythology. So Virgil basically would have to go back and sit around with Socrates and all those guys and
Right.
just kind of have a chill out for the rest of eternity. Although
Mm.
it is interesting, I think in Paradiso, he does say that at the end of time, when we run out of time and space,
Mm.
Jesus will come and do a final judgment.
Yes.
So Jesus will probably make, according to Dante, he would make everything all right. This hell and
Mm.
heaven and purgatory is not the true end of eternity, if you would. So unless he's judging people on earth, but I think he'll judge everybody.
Yeah, every year in the lower regions of hell, they still have a second look or a second appraisal. And it's interesting to bring up Nietzsche because there's the idea of eternal recurrence, right? It's like if you could live your whole life over and over again, that Christ will return to give these people a second opportunity. It's interesting because in the Inferno is almost like the waiting room. It's not necessarily limbo or purgatory, but it's like a prison if you put it in that Gnostic sense. It's the hollow earth prison planet that the souls are kept there until Christ can come down and be like, all right, well, you've gone through this horrible time for long enough. Like maybe you're ready to go on to the next level. And it's interesting that you bring that up. I kind of forgot about that, honestly. But yeah. And since as well, Miguel, you brought up the virtuous pagans, let's go back up. So we have
Sure.
Limbo. This is Canto number 4 in the first circle where Virgil and Dante, like you said, they're hanging out with Plato, Socrates, Hippocrates. This is the threshold between the lighter side of this underworld and then what they call the kingdom of eternal night. So in this area, the virtuous pagans are not necessarily bad people. Like we could say Hippocrates, the Hippocratic Oath is definitely a beneficial principle to apply in these strange times. Do no harm. Absolutely do no harm. Now, the interesting thing about this is that there is what we would call the citadel of human reason. I believe it's what it's called. My notes got a little messed up here. But yeah, there's an area in this underworld where the collective intelligence of the philosophers from Greece and these brilliant minds who weren't necessarily baptized in the same way as other Christians could still reside. They could still enjoy themselves and converse with each other. But they were still stuck in the underworld technically, but it's a lesser punishment. They're just, they have a little bit of light, but they're not totally out of the wood. Another thing that I brought up earlier, which is good to revisit because it's such a powerful symbol, is the second circle with, in terms of addictions or habits, these people who are swept away by their lust or by their bestial desires are caught in a storm. And it's really cool that Dante wrote in this metaphor or the symbol for a storm that cannot be tamed. Even if people adjust their sails, they can never master this great wind. They're being driven around by it left and right, up and down. And it really does show the fact that, let's say, if you were addicted to pornography, there is a certain point in that addiction where you do lose control. And it's almost as if you're on autopilot. And that's what being caught in a storm would kind of be like. But whether it's pornography or some kind of substance, either way, this area, the carnal, is a great representation of when someone is in the grips of addiction and they're trying to pull themselves out of it, how difficult it can be to tame a storm, which is nearly impossible unless you're, like manipulating the weather, like in harp or something like that.
Yeah. And what hell level is this again?
This is the second circle. This is the area of the carnal. And beyond this, while Dante's here, he's speaking with this couple who, they committed sexual sin. They were sent there. And Dante is so upset that he passes out. It's really interesting that he loses consciousness because it's so traumatic for him. He can relate to these people. He loves Beatrice. He has the same animal nature. He can't get rid of that, but he can see that he was also guilty of the same sin potentially. So
He was
And,
married to another woman, and even
right.
though he never touched Beatrice or flirted with her, in his head, he was cheating because she was the one.
Right. Yes, so he's going through that same mental process of, okay, I'm also guilty of this. That's why he's there. Essentially, Virgil's leading him through his own shadow side, and so just the fact that Dante loses consciousness is really interesting because if you're going to go through this experience and go through hell, like you wouldn't want to shut down. You would want to be here now and experiencing what you're going to experience. And so Dante is described as someone who swoons. He loses consciousness. He's totally overwhelmed. He hasn't yet integrated this shadow. And later on, after we go through the second circle, there's a really interesting area for the gluttons and the hoarders and the wasters. This would be the third and the fourth circles. And Virgil has a really interesting line here. So we have a lot of, you could say, hoarders. Hoarders who are trying to gather as much material as possible, whether that's like toilet paper in 2020 or any oil, whatever it might be. They are never satisfied, even if they have a ton, like a whole pallet of toilet paper. They're still not satisfied, and that reminds me of, I'm sure you're familiar with this, Miguel, the abundance mindset versus the scarcity mindset.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So yeah, so Virgil comments on the fact that these people who are hoarding, they're trying to gather as much as humanly possible. He says that all the gold in the entire world could not offer one moment of relief to their exhaustion. And it's interesting that he uses that word exhaustion too, because having all these things, like building a giant wall, it's still not giving them any relief, and they're exhausted. They're weighed down by all their things. Just like when Tyler Durden would say, the things that you own end up owning you, right?
Exactly.
Very Gnostic.
Yeah, and you're right. Don't, as I've learned late in my life, don't pray for money or having this bill paid. Just abundance. Go into the
Abundance.
energy. Yes, the universe or God will provide what you need when you need it. So,
Absolutely.
no need to hoard that toilet paper or really care if there's empty shelves at the store. There's plenty out there.
There is plenty.
So, yeah, I mean, even as we do this interview, people are talking about scarcity, but they just killed like 80 million birds because of some bird flu. So there's plenty of food out there.
There's plenty to go around. Yeah. Yeah. That's an excellent point. And it's an excellent comparison too, because there is almost like an unshakable anxiety that comes with the scarcity mindset. And that's what Dante is able to overcome just by witnessing what these people are going through. And besides the hoarders, there's also the wasters, and they are, well, because of their wastefulness, they could be wasteful with material goods, or they could be wasteful in relationships. And that could be, taking people for granted, or they were throwing away a good opportunity, burning bridges willy-nilly, not really thinking about the long-term consequences there. And what's happening with them? Well, when you're very, very wasteful, what's happening to you is, well, there are a group of people, the hoarders and the wasters, and they're butting heads. On one side, they're saying, why do you have so much stuff? And on the other side, they're saying, why do you use so much stuff? And they have the same problem. They feel like they don't have enough, or that they're going to run out eventually. So let's use it while we can, use it all up. What they're all lacking is moderation. And that's a great takeaway from this section, whether you're hoarding or wasting. It all has to do with using those resources wisely. You don't want to run through them too quickly, but you don't want to hoard them and harm other people in the process as well. So there's a couple good takeaways there.
Yeah, there's timeless advice from Dante being down in heaven.
Absolutely.
All right, please continue. Or I guess the only question I would have, I think that there are fallen angels down there. So there's for the conspiracy theories. Yes, the Watchers and the Nephilim are there if you want to go inspecting.
Yes,
it's a really cool place because it's so eclectic. You've got mythological monsters, Greek philosophers, fallen angels. I mean, Dante, he really puts together really almost Lord of the Rings kind of thing.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Genius.
Yeah. Bringing together politics and mythology and all these different archetypes is fascinating. So when we're talking about the fallen angels and the rebellious angels. We arrive at the capital of hell, which is called Dis or Dis. And just imagine the tower tarot card, this big scary tower, and it's like stormy, and it's the capital of hell. Like, what would you expect? It's not a very nice place. And before I talk about what happens to Dante here, I do want to bring up something really quick. In the beginning of the story, before Dante ever sets foot into the Inferno, he is described as wilting like a flower. He has no hope whatsoever. He's quite nihilistic, you could say. But through Virgil's inspiration and his motivation, he helps him open up like a flower would to receive sunlight or to receive divine wisdom. And this is a continual process that Dante at certain points will want to crawl up into the fetal position and give up. And it's Virgil who keeps him going. So in this case, there's a really interesting moment where Medusa comes in. And Medusa, of course, you cannot look her in the eye. It's something or someone that you literally need to avoid, because if you confront them directly, you're going to be turned into stone. So here's where Virgil and Dante start to encounter beings that overpower them. So Virgil only has so much power. He can only do so much to protect Dante. And the cool thing is that Virgil always uses language. There's never a fight. There's never like any violence. Virgil negotiates with these spirits. Just like if you're going through that death trip in an ayahuasca ceremony, you might have some kind of guide who can help to negotiate with these dark spirits so that they can leave you alone and not torture you too much. So
Blizzard should create sort of a Dante action game where you get to fight these bosses. Or
yeah.
I guess Doom, the game is kind of like that. And yeah, it reminds me too. Also, Virgil and Dante kind of remind me of Frodo and Sam when they're down there in Sauron's domain,
right?
Helping each other. And yeah, you mentioned he's lost hope, but in hell, there's that famous saying, isn't there? Abandon ye hope, all who enter.
Exactly. What did you think? Because that's a very famous line. So, like when you first heard that, abandon all hope, ye who enter. If we're thinking in terms of like a spiritual awakening or getting sober, anything like that, what did you make of that first message that Dante sees?
Well, from my perspective, and this is a completely esoteric reading, I don't know what word he used in Italian or the context of 13th century Florence, but I always go back to when Zeus wanted to punish humanity. He sent Pandora, who's actually a robot, not a woman, and all in this, it's actually a jar. All these bad things come out, and I think even some monsters and people. I think one of them appears in Dante's Inferno, but the last thing at the bottom is hope, and that's like Zeus's last apocalyptic Armageddon weapon against humanity. And people are like, but it's foolish hope. It's like when you're at the throes of your addiction or something, you're like, oh gosh, I just want things to get better. But you don't want to do any work. You don't want to give your will to God. You don't, that's what he meant, is silly hope that, oh shucks, things will just get better, and 2020 will get better if we just do what we're told. So I think if you go to hell, I think, the last thing you want is hope. You got to have faith, gnosis, determination, open-mindedness, and listen to your spirit guide.
Amen to that. Yeah, absolutely. Like having hope would give this experience start this journey. You cannot turn around and change your perspective. You have to see it through all the way to the end. You can't decide recovery or day 30. The fact is that it will involve a daily struggle, all that you put in paradise that we could imagine. So in this, Virgil can really do except ask him to go and hide. And so Dante's safe over in the corner, hiding behind some rocks. Meanwhile, Virgil is incapable of defeating Medusa. It's just not possible. That's like David and Goliath, right? So what Virgil does, which is really interesting, is Virgil calls upon a heavenly messenger to come down and intervene. And whether it's to defeat Medusa or to scare away all these other demons that are guarding this area of the fifth and sixth circle, this heavenly messenger comes down with a bang. It's literally a giant, massive earthquake or a rumbling of thunder. And there's no, like I said, there's no violence, there's no fighting. This angel, who I kind of imagine just in my own head, like an archangel of Michael, or the archangel Michael figure with a sword and all that, comes down, causes this huge explosion of noise, and all the demons in that area are terrified and they run away. And now the path is open again. And it's kind of cool to think about this, that of course Dante relies on Virgil for this guidance and this assistance. Like, you got to ask for help. You have to be able to say that you have a problem and then seek out the guidance that's necessary. And even someone like Virgil, who is a spirit, who is granted these divine powers, still has to ask for help. There are still times when even all the power that you've been given or that you've accumulated won't be enough. And it's always important to seek out help whenever you feel stuck. I think it's a good takeaway.
Yeah, definitely a very good takeaway too. And that's something, even in my recovery, I'm still stubborn, is just ask for help. Pick up a phone, have a conversation. There's so many ways. Yeah, we can't do it alone. That's just...
Yeah, help can come in so many forms, like you said, a phone call, or a quick text. You can even send your friend a nice meme if you want. That always does the trick.
Yeah.
So there's another interesting point on that when we talked about Philemon or Virgil or certain rivers that must be crossed in hell. These are other thresholds that Dante cannot cross by himself. In fact, it's Virgil who has to negotiate once again with these ferrymen, and they refuse. They say, "I'm not taking a mortal human being on my boat. Just no humans allowed, or no mortals allowed," basically. And again, it's really cool, the fact that Virgil is a poet, Dante is a poet as well. These two poets are using language to negotiate with darkness. And it's a very interesting symbolic or alchemical theme here, that you don't have to defeat demons with your fists or with weapons. You can negotiate, whether that's your mindset or your faith and your prayer and your practices. These things will contribute to the removal of darkness or the transcending of darkness, turning that lead into gold, if you will.
Yeah, well said. Love it.
Thank you. So as we move along, it's really interesting too, because I personally have only read the Inferno. I'm going to next dive into Purgatory and the Paradise. But for now, it's really interesting to see these themes develop. Like, Dante talks to these spirits, these lost souls, and some of them in the upper levels want to be remembered. And it's really interesting to consider, if you're on your deathbed at some point and you're thinking, who's going to remember me? Who's going to show up to my funeral and rejoice in those memories that we shared together? And for some of these souls, they beg Dante, please tell my story. Please pass on this message to the other mortals still out there who have time to reverse their ill behavior. But as you get lower and lower, and this is really interesting, as you get lower into the Inferno, some of these souls don't want their story told at all. They are so ashamed of themselves that they want to hide away. And it's interesting to think about, just like with Nietzsche's eternal recurrence. It's like, all right, if you would do this all over again for infinity, would you want other people knowing about your journey? And if you don't, then what kinds of steps could we take to make this journey, like, when people say make your mess your message, if we can embrace the fact that we're all guilty of these sins or these errors, and how can we tell our story in a way that would inspire people, that would help people overcome their own personal darkness by sharing and by being open and vulnerable? And that's what's cool about this show, and particularly Finding Hermes, is the fact that people put their cards on the table, like you said, and that's kind of what Dante's doing. He's laying all of his cards on the table, but he's also laying the cards of the collective, all of society. No one's spared from these circles. Even Plato and Socrates, people who might be considered virtuous, are still down there in some fashion.
Yeah. I know people don't want to talk about it, but Muhammad is also there, so nobody gets spared hell, basically.
Right. Now, to transition, because to transition a bit into a different direction. I was curious if you would answer this question. When we're thinking about the Inferno and this journey that we have to pass through, what's on the other side? Like when you imagine paradise, what kinds of images or symbols or archetypes do you imagine from your own perspective?
That's a good question. I mean, as a kid, of course, growing up Roman Catholic, it was the whole clouds and angels and
Mm.
harps, and it was dreadfully boring. I was like, this can't be it. But I would say it's more of an experience.
Mm.
It's not visual. It's that sense of wholeness and
Mm.
bliss and ecstasy and to be all where you just kind of extend everywhere and there's no real Miguel or Jake.
Mm.
I think that's what, if there was a paradise, that's what it would
Right.
be. And of course, that sense of eternal empathy and love and the ability to, again, experience those who are gone
Mm.
from our lives, that you're like, okay, we can hang out again just briefly.
Right. Yeah, it's really cool. There's a reunion with those that we've lost, but there's also overall not necessarily a physical experience in our physical body, but having the phenomena of consciousness, of being able to love and to feel joy or to feel connection to each other or to the source, to the God above God, as you like to say.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's interesting to consider that because Dante, at many points, as we already talked about, wants to turn around and give it all up and go into the fetal position. But Virgil's like, nope, you're here for a reason. There's no time to be nihilistic, my friend. You got to get through this. And this reminds me a lot of what Jordan Peterson speaks about, the fact that hell might be a real place. Who knows? There might be an underworld or like a Tartarian prison that we're sent to, like the gulag of the underworld. But in any case, whether there's a physical hell or there's not, we would create hell through our thoughts, through our deeds, and the whole point is we can create paradise too. And it's nice
Mhm.
to imagine the fact that, well, yeah, I mean, to imagine what would be paradise, and then that brings you one step closer to making that a reality. And I'm glad that Jordan Peterson went into detail about that because, he would say things like, well, if you say things that make you feel weak, then you'll make yourself weaker. It's kind of that law of attraction sort of thinking. It's that you can create paradise by intentionally putting out those positive thoughts, even in the face of such darkness or absurdity like we've seen throughout these 2020s, to stay on the path and not let the little things knock us off. What do you think?
No, beautifully said. And I mean, later on, the sort of Dante's other great competitor, Milton, in
Mm.
Paradise Lost. What did he say? The mind is its own place. It can make a heaven out of hell and a hell out of heaven. In
Mm.
a way, we are projecting these things, and the Buddhists had thousands of hells, but they were temporal. There were places where you're just going to get your ass kicked, and
Mm.
your karma sent you there. It reminds me, yeah, in Dante's hell, Lucifer falls and he actually creates this giant hole and ends up at the bottom. So it's
Right.
kind of in our world, and he's stuck there chewing on Judas for the eternity,
Mm-hmm.
and that's all he does, and bats his wings to freeze things to make the place as cold as Chicago or Connecticut.
Yes, sir.
Uh, but it reminds me of Neil Gaiman's The
Mm.
Sandman,
Mm.
Seasons of the Mist, and they made the Lucifer show where
Mm.
Lucifer like wakes up. He has his own gnosis, and he wakes up and he says, "Wait a second, I don't have to do this.
Mm.
I set myself here on purpose because of my stupidity and pride, but I
Mm.
can walk away anytime I want." So he's closing hell, and he sees like a tyrant, and this tyrant's being punished horribly,
Mm.
and the tyrant's like, I was an evil person, I deserve to suffer this and that. And Lucifer's
Mm.
like, psst, I'm not doing this to you, you're doing this, you
Yeah,
can
you're doing
walk
this to
out of
yourself.
here anytime you want. And the guy's like,
Mm.
no, no, no. He's like, Lucifer's like, fine, suffer, I don't give a shit.
It's amazing, yeah. And shout out to Neil Gaiman. He's an incredible author. I really loved American Gods, to put all those gods into these archetypes and characterize them in
Mm-hmm.
that specific way. But yeah, no, it's absolutely, there's a mental component to all this. You can create like a mental prison, this matrix that you can build around
Prison for
your
your
own.
mind, like Morgan said.
Exactly. Exactly, a prison for your mind. And welcome to the desert of
of
the
the
real
real.
in some cases, because there is one section. We have the burning sand. So that's absolutely a desert sort of environment. And these are where those who are violent against God, nature, and art reside. There's a great plain of burning sand, and it's a place just like the very bottom in this icy layer that's totally sterile and unfertile. So it's almost as if people who are driven to act out of violence are unable to produce anything creative. They're stuck in this sterile landscape. And it's a good lesson to think about because when Dante encounters these souls, whether they're blasphemers or they're violent, they're practicing violence. Virgil recommends that Dante, quote, walk in reverence, meditating good and evil without descending down to join them. So that reminds me a lot of this shadow work where you have to confront those dark forces within you, consider those dark thoughts, but don't let them consume you. And above all else, one of the other pieces of advice that Virgil gives Dante in this sterile, barren desert landscape is the fact that no matter where you are, you have to, quote, follow your gnosis available wherever you are, even in the darkest regions of hell. There's still a path that you have to find, that you have to follow. And sometimes it comes down to listening to that little voice, whether it's Jiminy Cricket or Virgil. There's always some sort of guidance that we can access, and that's really what I believe.
Yeah, no, well said. And I like how Dante is also saying needless violence against animals and mistreating the environment,
Mm-hmm.
nature, is frowned
Yeah.
upon. So he's got a good holistic view of what it is to be a good human being.
Yeah, it's as within, so without, right? The people who are abusing the environment, and
Hmm.
in turn, they are now stuck in a place that abuses them. It's very fascinating, and I would say from a perspective of karma, it's a very psychedelic story as well. Because if you have a set and setting that's arranged to give your experience a very positive and um, beneficial out outcome or journey or process, then that's what you can get. But if you go into the experience with a cloud of negativity hanging over you, then you're going to end up in a place like this, a pretty dark place. So it's very interesting that these people, these sinners, these lost souls, are stuck in perpetuity of whatever sin they committed on the earthly realm, and it's fascinating. I mean, like I said earlier, I can never go through the whole text in one episode. I can only scratch the surface, but whatever we pull out of it, I do believe it would be useful for anyone who's curious about their own spiritual awakening, their process of gnosis, and finding out what's down in the depths of their shadow, of their unconscious, and how do they relate to the collective in this regard.
Oh, well said. And I think it all ends as Dante's Inferno's ends. You're going to have to climb down the devil's ass because
Right, right.
he is you and you are him, the
Mm-hmm.
ultimate shadow, the shadow of God, as Jung said. So tell us about the ending of Inferno, which is kind of weird because Satan is sticking out from this lake of fire. He's got three
Mm-hmm.
faces. He's chewing on Judas,
Judas.
Cassius, and Brutus because, again,
Mm, right.
being
You got
Italian, those are the
Caesar. Yeah.
two great traitors of Roman culture, if you
Hmm.
would.
Absolutely.
But then he climbs up and down. That's the part I get a bit confused.
Yeah, the ending is a bit strange. It almost feels anticlimactic, although it's kind of like when the season of your favorite show ends. Like they're just trying to set up the next season, which is this climb up to purgatory. But yes, Dante has to maneuver through and around Lucifer and like climb down his legs. Yeah, he's literally hands on. Like, all right, this is the lowest level of hell, and we have to literally become close and intimate with Lucifer in order to escape. And the really cool part about this, which I'm so happy that we were able to arrange this in the way that we did, Miguel, is the fact that Dante arranges this story around Easter, around the resurrection.
Mm.
So he enters hell on Good Friday, and towards the end, once he finally reaches paradise, it would be Easter Sunday. And it's really beautiful, the fact
Like
that
Christ.
Dante,
Yeah.
just like Christ, there's a resurrection and a trial through fire, if you will, instead of a more of a crucifixion. Yeah.
Very cool.
But yeah,
And
just
then
on that ending. Sorry, the first thing that Dante does once he escapes hell is he looks up at the stars, and it's just a beautiful conclusion to this journey. Again, he's looking up at his guides, at the celestial landscape above him, and it was all worth it in the end to see those stars and to look at them in a much different way after going through all this.
yeah, very transformative. So
Mm.
what an amazing story indeed.
Mm.
I don't know else what we can cover. Again, there's so much of it. Are there any translations you suggest, or maybe
Yeah, yeah.
documentaries, or for those who want to
Mm.
find their own meaning from Dante?
So the copy that I was reading, which was full of great footnotes, was from John Ciardi, Ciardi. He had a great collection of notes that really helped me understand. It's pretty tricky, complex rhyme scheme, so that was really helpful. The other thing is, to keep it a little lighter, it's called Hell and Back. It's got a bunch of great comedians. I believe it's like a claymation animation type
Oh,
of film, and it's a really great cast of characters. Just think about, if you've ever seen the South Park movie, they have Saddam Hussein and Satan like working together down in hell. It's kind of like that. It's that cheesy dynamic where they have like the devils, and they're being manipulated by their boss, the head honcho, Satan, and it's a cool take on the Inferno itself. But I guess the thing I would want to the thing I would want to leave people with is the fact that you can pick up this book and read through it and kind of consider your own journey through the Inferno as you go through. But it's also important, like we discussed, to look up and to consider, where is this all leading to? Where is the paradise? What does paradise look like to you? How can you move closer towards it? And yes, sometimes you will have to pass through hell, maybe multiple times. Maybe you'll get through it and then you'll be sent back down there later in your life. You never know, but it's always worth it in the end to something valuable on the other side of Satan's asshole, as you could say.
or as Churchill said, when you're going through hell, just keep going. There
Just
will
keep
be
going.
paradise. Yes, you'll
Yep.
get
Just
through the
keep
other
swimming.
side.
Mm-hmm.
Great advice. And again, as I said, timeless, perennial. These
Mm-hmm.
mystics and religious people have visions. They're all similar. They have parallels. It's all
Mm-hmm.
about that inward journey to down into the darkness to find the treasures. As Joseph Campbell said, go down and you'll meet the dragon, but you need to encounter the dragon if you want the treasure. So
Love that.
same as it ever was. So awesome. So Jake, where can people find out more about you?
So thank you, Miguel. Yeah, I've got the Loco Listens podcast. I just started about a week ago. I've got 5 episodes out, and I do look forward to diving into more classic literature and uncovering these nice symbolic messages that we can get, these bits of gnosis that we can come out of these experiences with. So that's the Loco Listens podcast on Spotify, Google, Apple. I'm also on Instagram at Loco Listens if you want to connect with me there. And looking forward to diving into some more stories and some more shamanic experiences with these texts.
Bingo. Yes, it was a shamanistic experience what Dante went to. You hit it on the head, and a great way to end. And well, Jake, thank you very much for coming on Finding Hermes, and good luck with all your journeys down into hell, purgatory, or heaven. I'm sure we'll meet here and there.
Thank you so much, Miguel. It was an absolute honor. I'm looking forward to doing something like this again sometime.
Awesome. Well, take care. Thank you.
Thank you.
You know, my mother was an atheist. She used to say that there was good news and bad news about hell. The good news is, hell is just the product of a morbid human imagination. The bad news is, whatever humans can imagine, they can usually create.
And there you have it. Jake Loco on some fascinating and insightful ideas on the perennially relevant Dante's Inferno. I hope you enjoyed it. If you're wondering what that clip was from, that was from the recent and one of my favorite Gnostic themed content. It's a TV series, Severance. I really enjoyed it. And as I just mentioned, it's got powerful Gnostic themes, the ideas of remembering, the ideas of fragmented realities, the technocratic archons. It's amazing stuff, and I highly recommend it. Another show that I really like recently, or it's actually a movie that I went to see, and that's Everything Everywhere at Once. Really amazing Gnostic theme ideas, and does an excellent job with the concept of the multiverse. And between Severance and Everything Everywhere at Once, my faith has been restored because, yes, Gnosticism is very popular in culture today, but it hasn't been done very well. I was very disappointed with WandaVision, with Loki, and the idea how Marvel is doing the multiverse needs a lot of help. So, but it's nice for these two shows. And as you see from the clip, the idea of hell and how our imagination can create these hells on earth, whether in our heads or in reality, is very important. And Dante seems to have known this. Obviously, a powerful theme of Dante's Inferno and this show, and I will keep banging the drum on this, is that for any sort of transformation in the present or transcendence in the future, we still got to deal with the past. I know that's not very popular with New Age and modern religions, that past doesn't matter. But the truth is that it is very important. In the past is where we still, all of us, have a lot of trauma. We have a lot of issues that we need to integrate or resolve or find peace. There's a lot going on in the past, and there always is. And the past can be our personal past, our ancestral past, or even our cultural past. So the past is very important. That if we don't deal with the past, well, that's where the shadows are. That's where the demons are. That's where the archons are. That's where hell is. We must go into the underworld and find treasures and issues and battles that we still need to overcome. If not, it's hard to really operate spiritually or psychologically in the present. It's just a lot of baggage, and Dante's Inferno certainly definitely supports this. In fact, the more I study different religions and psychological systems, the more I realize how important it is. I mean, whether it's ayahuasca, AA, Gnostic rituals, which I've been studying a lot, the mystery religions, the idea of having to go to the past, to the underworlds that we've overlooked, to hell, is very important. That's where we must face these dark gods, these demons, and also find peace and serenity, because there are angels and Aeons there too. So keep that in mind. Go to the past. I mean, even Jesus, after he was crucified, he had to go down into hell for 3 days or 2 days or whatever before he could go up to the paradise. So an important theme, and Jake does a great job at showing us that theme and so many other themes, and with Dante's poem, which is still very popular and, as I mentioned, very relevant. As you might be noticing, it's been a while since my last Finding Hermes, and I do apologize. I think the last one I did was in February. And, well, a lot of things happened or did happen. There were some guests that needed to reschedule. There were some personal issues, and the Astronosis conference took a lot of the oxygen out of the air. But I will make it up to you, and I will continue with Finding Hermes. In fact, the next show will be a sort of double feature. I'll bring 2 very excellent guests, and we will talk a lot or find out a lot about the themes of consciousness, manifesting, and yes, dealing with the past, dealing with those hells that we either create or we haven't face yet that are still out there burning our asses and not allowing us to really embrace the mystery of life in the present and the transcendent promises of the future that Sophia offers. So stay tuned, and I'll have that. I'll have Finding Hermes for you sooner rather than later. That's all I got right now. I don't want to take up too much time. I want to put some effort into Aeon Byte and Finding Hermes content. So as always, I'm just going to say, I hope you have found that gnosis to go through the doors you need to go through with Hermes. And yes, Hermes is a psychopomp like Virgil. We all have a Hermes, a daemon, or a Virgil that could help us go through those doors. And if necessary, those doors might lead to another hell, or they might lead to another realm. But we can go through those doors into new possibilities of who we are and what reality is. I also hope that you can lay your cards down on the table, and as Mary Magdalene says in Dialogue of the Savior, and Joseph Campbell also said, to become transparent to the transcendent, without the weight of the past and without those hells we create in our minds. Thank you.